think we've got a good crowd. Let's go ahead. My name is Leslie Playa, and I'm the Executive Director of SAFE Project. Welcome to our Recovery Month webinar series. Today's presentation is Meeting the Diverse Need, Multiple Pathways of Recovery with Sydney Scheifetz. Following today's webinar, you will receive an email with a link to the recording. Although this presentation does not qualify for continuing education credit, attendance certificates will be sent out in the next 2 weeks for those that attended the live webinar. During the presentation, we ask that you provide your responses to the reflection questions in the chat, while any questions you have should be submitted in the Q&A section. I see some of you are already putting in the chat who you are, where you're from. Please go ahead and continue to do that. Before we get to the presentation, a little about SAFE Project, followed by our presenter's bio. SAFE Project is a national 501c3 nonprofit committed to overcoming the addiction epidemic in the United States. Established in 2017 by Admiral James and Mary Winnefeld after the tragic loss of their 19-year-old son, Jonathan, due to an opioid overdose, SAFE Project aims to save lives impacted by substance use and mental health challenges through overdose prevention and response, education on stigma, and development of prevention and recovery programs. SAFE Project also provides tailored guidance and training within its 4 key initiatives: safe campuses, safe communities, safe workplaces, and safe veterans. To learn more, please visit safeproject.us. Now on to our presenter. Sydney Scheifetz is the Assistant Director of Safe Campuses and brings over 9 years of experience in international public health, collegiate recovery, health education, and disease prevention to the field. In her current role, Sydney builds and oversees SAFE Project's student development programs, working to create learning, advocacy, and leadership opportunities for students nationwide, rooted in health equity, empowerment, and public health principles. Prior to joining SAFE Project in 2022, Sydney led prevention, harm reduction, and recovery programs at Gonzaga University. Additionally, she served in the field of global health and education in Brazil and on the polio eradication initiative in Nigeria, where she used public health research to control the spread of infectious disease. Sydney holds a Master of Public Health from Oregon State University and is certified in motivational interviewing, recovery coaching, and ethical public health research. Take it away, Sid.
Yay, thank you, Leslie. Hi, friends. My name is Sydney. I am so excited to be here with you guys today. First things first, before we get started, I just want to lay the foundation of our conversation today. So we're going to be discussing meeting the diverse need, multiple pathways of recovery. The reason why I created this presentation is that in the field of recovery, there are so many beautiful options. And something that I noticed is that only the same ones were talked about when I had a friend or a family member that was curious about recovery support. And what I realized is that whereas there's a lot of things out there, the dominant narrative tends to focus on certain recovery pathways. And we know that folks would benefit from being aware of all that exists and all the resources that exist for them. So with that said, because we're having conversations about recovery, you're not going to agree with me on all of this, and that's totally okay. We all have different perspectives because of what we're going to discuss today, because of our lived experiences, etc. I also want to note that this is a pretty surface level overview of some of these concepts, so please do use the question and answer feature for questions. And I really encourage you to look into these ideas further if you want to learn more about a particular concept or a particular recovery pathway. This is to get you excited about what exists out there, but I really do encourage you to check out the particular pathways website to learn more about their principles. Okay, last but not least, I do not want to talk at you for an hour, so please do engage in the chat, give me your thoughts, and use the question and answer feature for any questions you might have. Okay. This is me. Leslie told you everything that there is to know about me, so we're just going to skip past it. Okay, so what is our plan for today? Well, first, I want us to reflect on the current recovery landscape, what exists, and I want us to understand the tools that we can use to empower diverse recovery modalities. So again, please do not hesitate to put questions in the Q&A bar. And most importantly, if you are familiar with the pathways that we're going to discuss today or some of the public health concepts, please do use the chat feature to tell us what was your experience, what did you like about it, all that sort of stuff, in recognition that our purpose here today is to uplift all recovery resources. Okay, we're jumping in. So I want to chat briefly about the lenses in which we can view this presentation through today. So I already see in the chat, many of y'all are clinicians at treatment centers. Maybe you're a person interested in developing a recovery path. So we have a wide variety of folks in the room. I encourage you, if you're newer to this work, I want you to be thinking throughout the presentation of what assumptions do you currently make about recovery is and about what recovery is not, and then what gaps need to be filled. Second, if you're more experienced in the field of recovery, I want you to be curious and to take a beginner's mindset. So be thinking about what are new ways that we can do recovery? How can we pursue integrated recovery support? All right, let's jump in. So first, I want to hear from you. When you think of recovery and a recovery pathway, what typically comes to mind as an element of a recovery pathway? So here you might think meetings, you might think what else? Reflection. Peer support, love it. Thank you, Cal. Certainly, that's something that we're going to talk about, how many recovery pathways are built on this foundation of peer support. Yes, Anna, a support system, right? We often talk about how the opposite of addiction is connection. The best thing, one of the coolest things I think about recovery is that you don't have to do it alone anymore. There are other people that know what it's like, so leaning on them. Ooh, Ron, I love that. Nothing about us without us, right? So folks in recovery should be the folks that we are listening to as we're conceptualizing new ways of supporting people in recovery, new resources, et cetera. Pro-social activities, right? Yes, thank you so much, Audrey. So what are ways that we can be inclusive of folks that are in recovery, whether that's abstinence-based recovery or a reduced use pathway? How can we encourage these people to come around and find a place where they feel supported and also where their recovery is celebrated? Yes, thank you so much, friends. Okay, something
Hey
that
everyone. Hey Sydney, hold on one second. Hey guys, when you are submitting comments in the chat, please make sure that you are submitting to everyone. There's two different options that come up, so please just make sure that you're submitting to everyone so we can see all of your incredible answers. Sorry to interrupt you.
No worries at all. Thank you, friends. Yes, there's two options when you chat with someone. Okay, so something that I want to note here is some of these are beautiful, wonderful things. And other things that we typically hear at conferences are sometimes stereotypes that we hear within the recovery movement. So I want to note that our society, especially those who haven't been impacted by a substance use disorder, they might only know this epidemic through the media and through stereotypes. So our role is often to educate and share the diversity of options in the world of recovery so that everybody has the opportunity to find what works for them. And that's why we share our unique recovery stories. We share what works for us. We share what works for our friends. We share all of it. Okay, let's move on. I want to hear from you again. So I'm assuming this might be easy. Why can't we rely on a one-size-fits-all approach for recovery? Remember to use everyone in the chat, not just hosts and panelists. Ooh, I love some of these too. Removing stigma, they're repeatable steps, supportive accountability. Love that. Yes, Ruben, everyone is different. Amanda, recovery looks different for every individual. Not everyone recovers the same. Okay, love it. Friends, so I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. But yeah, so each of us is a unique individual. I love it. So substance use disorder and recovery, I argue, must be viewed through a social justice and a cultural lens. So social justice, when we're thinking about justice in terms of the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. So thinking about that, recovery resources and support are not equally accessible to all, right? When we think about some formal recovery treatment opportunities, some of those are very expensive. Some of those are very far, right? And so depending on our socioeconomic status, there might be large barriers to accessing certain recovery resources over others. Also, recovery very much does look different depending on culture, and that's why it's so important for recovery to be diverse and inclusive. With that cultural piece, it's also important to note that recovery is more stigmatized in certain cultures and certain communities than another. I was just chatting with someone who said we really need to get people okay with identifying as in recovery. And so many people are calling it healing or something else, and we need them to use the word recovery. And in my head, it's recovery is one way of thinking about it. But when you think about certain indigenous cultures, they prefer to use the word healing. And I would argue for many folks, the word healing is more holistic. So anyways, depending on the culture that we're coming from, the languages that we're using and the way that we perceive different pathways is going to be different. Also, last thing I want to note is that as social injustice, stigma is the responsibility of the societies that created that stigma, meaning it is on all of us to end the stigma, as stigma we know is one of the largest barriers to recovery. Okay, I'm going to move on here and let's get into some numbers. So over 20 million people in the United States identify as in recovery. So what does this mean? Well, this data comes to us from SAMHSA in 2021, and they report that over 20 million American adults report that they had a substance use problem and consider themselves to be either in recovery or to have recovered. So with this number here, we can begin to see the need for many recovery pathways, given the sheer amount of people that could benefit from recovery support. I also want to acknowledge that when I first started working in the field of recovery, something that you often heard is that recovery is possible, but recovery is lifelong. And what this number shows us, and many folks, Americans and elsewhere, will share their experience that recovery wasn't lifelong for them. They met the point that they wanted to achieve, they recovered. And for folks that identify as in recovery and that is a lifelong journey for them, we celebrate that. For folks that identify as having recovered, we celebrate that as well, because each person's journey and each person's goals are going to be their own. Okay, a little bit, let's just go into the definition of recovery. I think that this might be a review for many of us. So SAMHSA defines recovery as a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. I'm going to pause there. What sticks out to you about this definition? I'm particularly interested in what's missing from this definition to you. Something, oh, yay. Striving for full potential. Yes, I love that. Oh, Nicholas, welcome. Awesome. Yeah. Another thing that I always find interesting about this definition of recovery is that it doesn't say anything about drugs and alcohol, right? And so we can see that to be in recovery is to be so much more than one's relationship with substances. It is often this holistic approach to changing aspects of our life, changing aspects of our behavior, being mindful of the communities in which we place ourselves, our attitudes, our behaviors, etc. Live a self-directed life. Love this part totally. There is no time limit. It's a process. Absolutely. Yes. Recovery happens for everyone at their own time. Okay. So let's jump in then to some recovery support options. So first things first would be mutual aid groups. And we are going to talk extensively about the mutual aid groups that exist. Next would be clinical support. So if we think of a treatment center, for example, often at treatment centers, there are both mutual aid groups, so 12-step meetings, smart recovery meetings, et cetera, and there is one-on-one clinical support from a clinician. But thinking about some folks choose to recover and they only go to mutual aid groups. Some folks choose to recover and they only go to clinical support. They're just working with their therapist in order to do so. Another great option as far as recovery support that exists are recovery community organizations. So let's think on a college campus, a collegiate recovery community is a wonderful recovery community organization. Or if you're in a city that has a recovery cafe, right? A recovery cafe and many of these recovery community organizations are safe spaces for folks in recovery to go. There's often a coffee shop there. There's often meeting spaces there. There's public spaces there. There's a lot of activities and events, right? So it is a community space for folks in recovery and often for their family members and loved ones to also understand recovery more. Awesome. Okay. Sorry, friends, I'm trying to read in the chat as well as I move along. Okay, let's jump into then some particular mutual aid groups. So when we're looking at the left-hand side of the screen here, you will see examples of 12-step groups. So Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, etc. Simply for the sake of time, I am not going to go into detail on 12-step. Why? Because if I'm being honest, 12-step meetings are the dominant recovery pathway, right? And some important bits about 12-step is that they have often a Christian foundation, which I would argue has more shifted now to a higher power foundation in order to be more inclusive, right? So whatever higher power you believe in, you can use that higher power, give it up to God, as we often say in those meetings. Many 12-step meetings are abstinence focused. I would argue, though, that many folks take their recovery into their own hands, and just because they're part of a 12-step community does not mean that they have to follow this abstinence focused pathway, but many folks choose to. Another important piece about 12-step is that they are peer-led, they are peer-focused, right? So nobody in this group is above one another, nobody is leading the group. Instead, we are all on equal ground, talking about our experiences, etc. Okay, but friends, really Google 12-step if you're interested in learning more about the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. If you're not familiar with this pathway, I really hope you look into it to learn more of if is this recovery pathway one that fits what you're looking for. Okay, I also want to note, as I did, that do some pathways dominate in the field of recovery? I would argue that many of them do, and it's because they work for many people and they save lives. But I'm particularly interested in our conversation today of, can we be mindful to uplift all recovery pathways without alienating or belittling any recovery pathway? Ooh, thank you, Ruben, for acknowledging Celebrate Recovery. Yes, this is a Christian-focused recovery group. Thank you. Okay. Some other ones here I want to acknowledge. On the right side of the screen, you're going to see 5 resources, 5 groups here. We're going to talk more in detail on 3 of them. So 2 that I'm going to point out is that bottom right side one, which is the Wellbriety movement. So the Wellbriety movement is a grassroots initiative that's focused on wellness and recovery in Indigenous communities, particularly those that have been impacted by substance use and historical trauma. The other one that I want to note here is the upper right-hand side. You'll see that W there. So that is Women for Sobriety, and Women for Sobriety is dedicated to supporting women in the recovery of substance use disorders and alcohol use disorder. And it focuses on the unique challenges that women face in recovery. So let's say you're a person that has been looking for a recovery meeting that focuses more on an Indigenous pathway of healing, or you have a friend or a family member that is Indigenous. I myself am in the state of Arizona. It is such a beautiful, vibrant place of a mixture of Indigenous folks and the healing pathways and other opportunities. And Women for Sobriety. I was just talking to my aunt about a recovery pathway that might work for her. And because of her lived experience, she was seeking one out that was focused on the unique challenges of women. So we talked about Women for Sobriety. Anyways, these are some of the multiple recovery support groups that exist for folks. With that said, I want to go into examining a couple in larger detail. Okay, so let's shift into talking about smart recovery. So I'm willing to bet that many of y'all have heard about smart recovery, because as far as I can see, after 12-step, they are one of the biggest players in the game. Smart Recovery stands for Self-Management and Recovery Training, and it is a self-help program that is designed to support individuals seeking to overcome addiction and also compulsive behaviors. So interesting about SMART is that they use a scientific approach that uses the evidence-based practice of cognitive behavioral therapy and motivational interviewing, 2 incredibly well-researched and effective behavior change tools. Smart Recovery uses the foundation of their 4-point program. So you can see that here. The first is building and maintaining motivation. So obviously, change requires motivation. That's where motivational interviewing comes in. And SMART helps folks to find motivation for change and how to maintain that change along their recovery journey. Second would be to cope with urges and cravings. So, right, urges and cravings are a normal part of a recovery journey, and SMART helps people to find ways to manage them and to support them even if they return to use, right? There is no shame in returning to use from a substance use disorder. Instead, we celebrate getting right back on track in whatever way that looks like for folks. The third 4-point program idea is this of managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So SMART helps people to recognize and challenge the thoughts and beliefs that get in the way of change and develop more balanced ways of viewing ourselves and of viewing the world. And then last, number 4, is to live a balanced life. So once you are managing or have stopped a particular behavior, this behavior of concern, you might feel a sense of emptiness, right? We often hear folks say like, well, alcohol was my best friend. I hear that a lot in the recovery movement. And so SMART supports folks as they achieve goals to help enjoy a meaningful and enjoyable life. I also want to note here that SMART is open for folks that are both in recovery from addictions like substance use disorder and also compulsive behavior. So this might look like a gambling addiction or a pornography addiction, etc. Oh, I love Anna says Smart Recovery is offered as one of the groups in our organization. I love that. Yes, Ruben says it works better if you come with open-mindedness. Yay, I love it. Thank you, friends. Other important notes about SMART is that it is non-theistic, right? So they do not have any sort of a religious or spiritual foundation. SMART can include moderation. Folks really are encouraged to choose their own goals. So whether that is complete abstinence or reduced use, folks entering SMART recovery choose their own goals. Often, SMART is used in conjunction with other recovery pathways. That is so beautiful. I was just talking to someone that SMART is their primary form of recovery, and they also attend so many other types of recovery pathways, because they recognize that recovery needs to be holistic. And so SMART is filling one of their buckets, and maybe they're attending a 12-step meeting, and et cetera. So many folks in SMART use it in conjunction with other recovery pathways. Okay, let's move on then, friends. And please do, if you have questions about a particular recovery pathway, put it in the question and answer feature. Okay, we are going to move on here to another one that we see on our screen, which is that of Recovery Dharma. So Recovery Dharma offers a trauma-informed and empowered approach to recovery based on Buddhist principles. Again, this program is peer-led, and they often describe themselves as non-theistic. So I am a Buddhist practitioner myself, and something that was very interesting for me when I first started practicing is that many folks identify Buddhism as a religion, and many folks identify Buddhism as a philosophy. So within the Recovery Dharma context, many folks are choosing to believe that Buddhism is a philosophy, a way in which we live our lives. Okay, but important to note that this program uses the Buddhist Dharma teachings, which includes the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, to guide people into better well-being. Friends, if you're a person in recovery, I really encourage you to just look up the Four Noble Truths. They were super impactful for me in my life. It's really what got me into many aspects of this field. So again, if there's anything in any of these presentations that you're curious about, give it a Google search or plop it in the Q&A feature. Okay, some of the foundation of Dharma recovery then is renunciation, right? So committing to the intention of abstinence from addictive substances. For process addictions, right? So this might be a gambling addiction. We identify and commit to using wise boundaries around our harmful behaviors. I want to note, though, that in my life, I've seen many folks that choose to attend recovery Dharma meetings, and their ultimate goal is not abstinence, right? I've also seen this in various 12-step meetings. I think that the field of recovery, as it has grown, has become much more inclusive to, hey, what you choose to do for yourself and what works for you is up to you. I do not know you better than you know yourself. And I think it is beautiful that we are all really embracing that now. Okay, second, a key foundation of Dharma recovery is that of meditation. So we commit to the intention of developing a daily meditation practice. Meditation, mindfulness, this is going to look different for everyone. I know that before I started meditating, it was something that I could not really fathom. But going for a walk and just being mindful of my surroundings is very much meditation, if I choose it to be that way. Anyways, meditation, key aspect of this pathway. Next is meetings. I want to note that all of the pathways that we are going to discuss today have a foundation of attending meetings. In early recovery, within Dharma recovery, folks attend recovery meetings as often as they can. This is also very true in like the 12-step realm, right? 90 meetings in 90 days. A lot of these recovery pathways have overlapping things because we know that they work. Okay. Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Ruben, for adding that. NA normally has you do 90 meetings in 90 days. I have seen this as very helpful for many folks in building not only a good relationship with recovery, getting to know folks in the community, setting routines for themselves, et cetera. And I think we can see that this is an idea that translates among many recovery pathways. Okay, also within Recovery Dharma, there is a focus on the path. So by this, it is talking about the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. So the Four Noble Truths, what is life and what do we do about the suffering in life? The Eightfold Path, how do we walk our life so that we can alleviate our suffering in life? Friends, that is the fastest level overview, and really not a good one of what the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path are. But if you're curious, please do give it a look-see, or I'm here to answer questions at the end. Next would be inquiry and investigation. So exploring the truths and how they relate to addictive behavior through writing and sharing in-depth, detailed inquiries. So again, the first noble truth is to be human is to suffer. I think most of us can agree with that, right? We know that life isn't all rainbows and sunshine. We all experience pain or suffering in our life. And so in this recovery pathway, there's really this focus on investigating and exploring the behaviors through those lenses and writing about them. Okay, Sangha. Sangha is just the Buddhist word for community. So again, we see this translated across many recovery pathways. We are stronger together. We lean on each other. And we're cultivating relationships within a recovery community to support our own recovery and to support the recovery of others. I believe this is true for almost all recovery pathways, right? Whereas recovery is an individualized journey, it's going to look different for each and every person. We are not doing it alone. We need each other. Okay, last but not least is growth. So undertaking a lifelong journey of growth and awakening, awakening a very Buddhist idea. Friends, I do want to acknowledge here that you will see so many things within this pathway that are applicable to so many other pathways. And that's why I think for so many folks, the longer they're in recovery, the more their recovery becomes bigger, which is such a beautiful thing, right? You take something from this recovery pathway that works deeply for you. You take something from this pathway that translates really well for you, and you incorporate them all together to be the best form of yourself, to strengthen your recovery to the best of your ability. Yes, I love that. We need support systems in order to make it. Yeah. Okay, friends, let's shift into the third and final deep dive that we're going to focus on today, and that is of the pathway of moderation management. So moderation management is a behavioral change program and a support group network for people who are concerned about their drinking and have a desire to make a positive lifestyle change. So it empowers individuals to accept personal responsibility for choosing and maintaining their own path, whether that be moderation or abstinence. Similar to other pathways, moderation management is a secular group, so no religious foundation, with the core principles of being free, being flexible, being accessible, and being non-judgmental. It really emphasizes self-monitoring in that, sure, many folks within moderation management will choose an abstinence-focused path, but you can see in the name, moderation management, many folks are here to moderate their alcohol or other drug consumption, and it really emphasizes self-monitoring and personal responsibility, encouraging participants to set their own limits. So I worked on college campuses for the past 6 years. And when working with college students, something that I love that moderation management says, you'll see under the habits here, is that there is a difference between dependence and habit. Problem drinking is a habit that can be controlled through cognitive behavioral principles, right? So this requires someone to really be honest with themselves about where is their alcohol use, right? Is it a habit or is this a dependency, and therefore act accordingly? But something that I noticed when working with youth is that anytime a student had a problematic relationship with substances, we automatically assumed, oh, they're addicted. They have substance use disorder. We know that that is far from the case, right? And so I love that there are options out there for folks that have a problematic relationship with a substance and want to work to alleviate that. And abstinence might not be required for that. Okay. Friend, I'm going to get to your question at the very end. Okay, let's keep moving forward. So some of the important aspects of moderation management would be self-assessment. So again, participants evaluating their drinking habits and identifying their own goals for moderation, setting limits. So members learn to establish personal limits with their alcohol intake and promote healthier drinking patterns, and this holistic approach. So the program really encourages a balanced lifestyle, focusing on overall well-being beyond just alcohol consumption. Again, there's a foundation of the goals that folks set, so the desire to make a positive lifestyle change, right? This looks different from some other recovery pathways in that some of them have a desire to stop the substance completely. Moderation management makes sense. A desire to make positive lifestyle changes, empowering individuals to accept personal responsibility. This sounds very familiar to other recovery pathways, for choosing or maintaining their own path. Again, whether abstinence-based or moderation-based. We talked about the habits piece, and moderation management has a foundation of behavior change. So encouraging folks to set specific drinking goals, such as limiting to one number of drinks per day or per week. Now, again, I've seen this to be highly effective for many individuals. Something that I've learned the longer I've been a person very close to the recovery community is that of if someone is drinking too much or using a substance too much, they are automatically addicted and they automatically need to stop. As with many human behaviors, we are not born with how to have a responsible relationship with a substance. And there are many programs out there that can help folks kind of find what they're looking for. Okay, friends, let's move on from some of a deep dive into some of these recovery pathways, into some psychology and public health foundations to better understand what we're talking about. Okay, so I'm willing to bet that a lot of this comes as review, but what we know to be true about recovery is that a recovery is a journey that is individualized, it is intentional, it's dynamic, and it's a relational process involving sustained efforts to improve our wellness. So many folks have talked about this, right? It's individual, it looks different for each of us, and yet it's relational. It happens in relation to other people. It's intentional. We need to want it, and it's dynamic. It can change at every time. It should potentially shift and evolve. It doesn't have to, but for many folks, they find that that works for them. Important to note is that the pathway that an individual chooses is often based on their own cultural values, their socioeconomic status, and their psychological and behavioral needs, right? Because we all do not have the same cultural values. We come from a wide variety of cultures, and that is a beautiful thing. Because we all have our own psychological and behavioral needs, including our own paths, our own causes and conditions, what we need is going to look different. And the next couple slides are going to help me illustrate this. So let's jump into some of these public health and behavioral health concepts to help us understand recovery pathways better. The first one being that of social determinants of health. What sort of a presentation would this be if we didn't talk about them? Okay, so that was a public health. Okay, anyways, nerd here. Social determinants of health are the conditions and the environments where people are born, where they live, where they learn, work, play, worship, and age that affect health, that affect our functioning, that affect our quality of life outcomes and our risks. So just a couple of them that we can pull out here. We know that our economic stability, our finances, largely determine our health. So what do we have access to? Can I afford safe housing? We know the 4 pillars of recovery, one of the 4 pillars is housing, a safe and stable place to live. Now, I believe this comes to us from the Betty Hazelton Ford Foundation, says that housing is absolutely necessary for recovery to thrive. And we know that it is a privilege to have housing. Something I will get on and then I will get right back off my soapbox. Something that I often hear is when you're driving down the street and you see a person impacted by homelessness, sometimes you'll hear people say comments of like, well, if they only got sober, if they only stopped using drugs, there'd be resources for them or they wouldn't be homeless. We're going to talk a little bit about that later, but something that we know to be true is that the 4 pillars of recovery, one of them is housing. So housing often needs to come before behavior change. I encourage you to really think about that, because when I first heard that, and I know when many people first hear that, they think, no, we can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And I think that idea is a little bit outdated sometimes. Okay, next, economic stability typically comes with higher levels of education, right? And so that brings us to our educational access. Also, something to note is that making healthy choices, knowing what healthy choices are as it pertains to our relationship with substances, et cetera, is often a privilege, right? So many of us grew up in homes where we didn't know what healthy options were, or potentially folks weren't modeled what healthy options looked like. And so this is a process of learning what that looks like, but it is not all of us came from the same educational foundation. Healthcare and healthcare access. So the hospitals that we have access to, the treatment centers that we have access to. Do we live in a rural community that we only have one treatment center option? Or do we have many treatment center options that we have the opportunity to choose? Also, most importantly, are these affordable to us? Not only do I have health insurance, can I afford to obtain a resource like this? Am I going to go into debt for a long time? Or am I employed by an organization that would celebrate me using such a resource for myself, right? So the healthcare access that we have is a privilege. I also want to note that often, and then certainly there's neighborhood and our built environment, right? I think this speaks a lot to our culture and our community. How are substances talked about? How are substances used in a community, right? And then our social and community context. What are the ways that our communities and our families, et cetera, talk about substances? How do they talk about recovery and addiction? To what extent is this stigmatized or celebrated? Yeah. Process to gain control over one's life and the direction one wants to go in life. Very cool, Ruben. Okay, so I want to note that often these build off of each other, and what a person has access to greatly impacts the recovery path that they choose. when I did a deep dive a couple weeks ago, as far as like, if I were to seek treatment in my area here in Phoenix, Arizona is where I am located, what sort of options would I have in the treatment centers? The vast majority of them use a combination of a 12-step program for group programs and clinical counseling, right? So one-on-one support. A handful of other ones have the option of a smart recovery meeting. But where I live and what treatment centers I have access to often impacts if I choose to go to formal recovery treatment. Again, recognizing that there is privilege in that. Many folks are in safe and stable recovery as they define it, and they have never attended a formal treatment facility. But oftentimes, the treatment that we have access to influences our pathway to recovery. Okay. I want to move on here to talking about other behavioral health concepts that might impact a person's needs in recovery. And that would be that of adverse childhood experiences. Friends, something that I forgot to note is that both social determinants of health and adverse childhood experiences, I believe, are full semester long classes in an undergraduate or master's level program. And I went over it in 5 minutes. So please do recognize that we missed a lot here. And if you're curious about them, please either reach out with more questions, comments, concerns, or do some poking around. There's actually a lot of great resources, I think like free YouTube videos on all of these concepts and more. The internet is a beautiful place. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about adverse childhood experiences. So adverse childhood experiences are traumatic events that occur in our adolescence, so between ages 1 and 17. Stress from these adverse childhood experiences can negatively affect our brain development, our immune system function, and our stress response system. So I was reading a lot of research about chronic disease and the impact that adverse childhood experiences have on certain diseases later on in life, and that stress as a whole has later on in life in disease onset. And changes that occur in the brain and body because of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, affect a person's attention, their decision making, their learning ability, and can often lead to mental and chronic health conditions as stated. So we know that there are things, trauma and genetics being two major factors that increase a person's likelihood of experiencing a substance use disorder. I want to note there, though, that risk for a substance use disorder is incredibly complex. So a person could have experienced trauma, a lot of trauma throughout their life, and that does not mean that they will go on to experience a substance use disorder, but it does increase their likelihood. Same thing with genetics, right? So if you have a genetic predisposition of addiction in your family or substance use disorder in your family, certainly you are at an increased risk, but that does not mean that you will go on to develop a substance use disorder. Risk for substance use disorder is incredibly complex. Okay, with that said, because of a person's early experiences, they may be more inclined to use one pathway of recovery over another, right? So let's just say for the point of this sake, if a person has some religious trauma in their upbringing, they might be less likely to seek out a recovery resources that has a foundation of any sort of religious foundation. Let's say a person was harmed by a particular gender early on in life. They may choose to use a recovery resource that focuses on the gender that they feel most comfortable seeking support from, right? So because all of us have very different lived experiences, it is important that we have so many recovery pathways that folks feel embraced by. We do not ask folks to change what they need in order to fit into a box of recovery. We change our boxes of recovery to make it easier for people to fit into. Okay. Last concept let's touch on is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, friends, this is an entire course on psychology, hierarchy of needs, etc. But Maslow's hierarchy of needs was created in 1943, and it states that people are motivated to fulfill their more basic needs before they can move on to their more advanced needs. So we can see our basic needs at the bottom there. That is our psychological needs. Humans require food, water, warmth, and rest in order to survive. If you don't have food, you will not make it, right? And then you can kind of see up and up from there. People need security and safety. They need intimate relationships. We've talked about that a lot right now. Like we do together. We need healthy relationships in our lives in order to thrive. Obviously, self-esteem, right? So feelings of accomplishment, feeling good about ourselves. I have seen the real detrimental impact this has on people's lives when they don't love themselves. And that is why so many folks' recovery journeys involves learning to love themselves, learning to feel accomplished in themselves. And then last but not least, are fully self-actualized, you are at the tip of the needs pyramid, this is when and only when you can reach your full potential, including your creative activities, etc. So according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, people are born with the desire to be fully self-actualized, right? We all want to reach our fullest potential, keeping in mind that this is either conscious or unconscious. We all want to reach our fullest potential. We all want to live a good life, right? And I would argue that recovery is at the tip of the pyramid. Being self-actualized, reaching your full potential and working towards that is at the top of the pyramid. So how can we work with people to get their other needs met? And can we expect people to recover when they don't have their basic needs met? I would argue that we can't, right? So to illustrate one of this, safety and warmth are the two of the concepts that are lowest on this pyramid. And to be honest, what else provides safety and warmth? If you do not have a safe and stable place to live and you do not have a blanket, what else provides safety and the feeling of safety, not real safety, but the feeling of safety? And what else provides warmth? Drugs do. Drugs for many folks provide the feeling of safety and provide warmth, right? And so without that, if we do not have those needs met, what else are folks turning to get those needs met? Because according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we are all striving to get these needs met in whatever way we think that we can. Okay, friends, I want to acknowledge that these are some concepts that help us understand why recovery is not one size fits all, why our human experiences impact what it is that we need in recovery, and they are three big concepts. So please do ask questions, and please do, you can Google social determinants of health, adverse childhood experience, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and watch a 5-minute YouTube clip and learn more about this. And I really encourage you to reflect on, why does this make sense for me? Did I choose a recovery pathway, or am I curious about recovery pathways or whatever because of what I had access to, i.e. my social determinants of health? Was it because of the adverse childhood experiences I did or did not have? Is it because of what I lacked access to or what I had access to? Speaking of hierarchy of needs, right? So I think understanding all of these helps us to understand what people have as part of their recovery, what they want to gain as part of their recovery, and all of our unique circumstances as to why we choose what we choose in our recovery. Okay, friends, we are going to touch on briefly a pretty popular idea, I would say, in the field of addiction recovery, which is that of recovery capital. So recovery capital are both internal and external resources that can be drawn upon to initiate and to sustain recovery. So some of these things might look like our support systems. We talked about this a lot in various pathways. All of the pathways that we talked about today talk about doing it together. We're not doing this alone anymore. So our healthy support system, our friends and our families is one aspect in which we can protect our recovery. I like to think of recovery capital as an umbrella. It is that bolsters someone's recovery and also shields them from the things that can be detrimental to a person's holistic recovery and healing. Transportation, easy and simple one, right? If I do not have a vehicle, and if I live in a rural community that to get from point A to point B is going to take me 4 hours on a bus, I do not have access to a lot of recovery opportunities. Sometimes increasing our recovery capital can look like disengaging from people and places that cause us harm, right? You often hear this in recovery of recovery is a total lifestyle change. And often that means changing the places that we frequent and people that we frequent them with. Personal and social identity, understanding oneself, understanding our lived experiences, our point of views, our identity can be very helpful in a person's development and their recovery. Social support and attitudes and knowledge. I think we take for granted how much of a privilege a healthy attitude is, right? Because something that we talk about in a lot of recovery pathways is this idea of a victim mindset, right? Our attitudes and our knowledge really does impact either us being shielded by hardships in our life or being protected under our recovery umbrella. Okay, so a little bit more on this. What if we identify that works across recovery pathways? Many of y'all have put them in the chat. We know that community works, right? We're doing this together. We know that self-reflection works, getting real with ourselves, not being unconscious to what upsets us or why we do the things we do, et cetera, but being real with ourselves, having that self-reflection. Self-empowerment. So believing that we can do things, encouraging ourselves to do things, sorts of thing. And meetings, many of the recovery pathways that we've talked about have a foundation of attending meetings. Again, getting real with ourselves, talking openly and honestly. I think this is something in recovery that we all have gotten, for many folks in recovery, have gotten a lot better at talking openly and honestly. And that for many folks, you show up to your first recovery meeting and whatever that looks like, and to share many aspects of your lived experience is very challenging. And the people in my life that are in recovery and that are the strongest in their recovery, they are open, they're honest. That is such a beautiful thing that I think many folks develop that skill the longer they're in recovery. Super importantly, many of these recovery pathways have a foundation of is letting go of shame. You could hear me rant about this forever, so I will not. But to me, shame is not an effective behavior change motivator, right? So often society shames people into stopping a certain behavior. Let's use the idea of cigarettes, right? So society is often shaming folks into stopping cigarettes by saying, ugh, that's a dirty habit. Ugh, you're gross for doing it. Ugh, it's bad for your teeth or whatever. That is increasing a person's shame. What happens though? That shame can create a very short behavior change, right? So someone will put down the cigarettes for maybe 2-3 weeks, but shame is not a sustainable behavior change motivator. So it doesn't last. What does last when you get someone to temporarily change their behavior through the use of shame? The feeling of shame is prolonged. The feeling of not being good enough, feeling bad about oneself, that does persist, but behavior change does not persist. And that is why shame is not an effective behavior change motivator. Rather, self-reflection, self-empowerment, learning to love ourselves is a positive behavior change motivator. Okay. And then another foundation that many of these recovery pathways all hold true is that of helping others or finding our purpose through being of service, through helping other folks either on their journey or throughout their life. I love this. Other folks are saying to be honest, to be open-minded, for willingness to have a change, etc. Ooh, I love this, friends. Okay. One more concept before we start to wind down. So as I think we've learned today, recovery requires a holistic approach, which addresses the multiple facets of our health and wellness. And these approaches often don't always treat substance use as their primary concern, right? So recovery is also this pathway of increasing our wellness in all aspects of our wellness. You can see some of those here, right? Our social wellness. If we are isolating, recovery often means being more social in the ways that works for us, right? Going to recovery meetings, etc. Our environmental wellness. If we are in a place that we live that we do not feel safe and comfortable, changing our environmental wellness, if we have the privilege to do so, might be an important aspect in our recovery. Our spiritual wellness. Many folks, and someone actually put it in the chat earlier, like what someone put in the chat, what works best for me is my higher power. I love that, friend. I love that you found what works for you. And so for many folks, increasing their spiritual wellness is a great way to increase their recovery. Okay, friends, I want to end before we jump into 2 discussion questions with a quote from Dr. Gabor Mate, who is an addiction expert. He is a speaker and he is an author and a physician, I believe, out of Canada. And he states that addiction begins with solving a problem. And the problem is that of human pain, emotional pain. The first question is not why the addiction, it's why the pain. So with that said, no human pain is the same, but we also know that human pain is not relative, right? My pain is different from someone else's pain, and so we don't need to compare it. But recognizing this, that all of us are going through the human experiences and all of us have unique needs. What is it how do we meet those needs and how do we keep it open so that folks that have different pain than us or different needs than us are also able to find what works for them? Okay. Friends, let's shift into, we have 10 minutes left. So I want to hear from you. Plop in the chat, really give me your thoughts. Where do you notice gaps in current recovery support? Maybe this is you're a new person in recovery and you're curious for more, or you've been in recovery for a long time and you wish there was more. Or maybe you're on a college campus and there's certain things that are available to you and not others. Or maybe it's a mind shift that we need to make in the field of recovery. So where do you notice gaps in current recovery support? Focusing on the solution rather than the problem. Ooh, I love that, Ruben. That is something that I feel very passionate about in the field of recovery, right? So often a lot of pathways of recovery are built off of speakers, right? So somebody shares their story and we learn through their story. Something that I often notice about speakers, though, is that we focus so much on the problem. You go to a speakers meeting, it is 45 minutes of here's how bad my life was in addiction, and it's 5 minutes of and I'm better now, right? I like the quote of we tell someone's recovery story, we do not tell someone's addiction story. Can we share the parts of ourselves that are healed and promote that? Leslie says, depending on where you live, there aren't always a variety of options. So true, right? Rural, urban communities are going to have access to different things. I also want to note that every resource that is illustrated that we went over today, though, friends, has an online option. The pandemic, where it had many harmful aspects, one of the aspects that I think many of us appreciated is the access to more online resources. So all of these, if you check out their website, you will be able to find virtual meetings to attend. Okay, Amanda, oh, hi, Amanda, says many campuses are hesitant to offer recovery resources due to stigma. So true, Amanda, right? So we know that stigma is still pervasive in our communities, and stigma does impact a person's ability to seeking out recovery, right? Particularly college students. Some students are better at dealing with that stigma than others, but it is unacceptable for us to think that all students are okay identifying as a person in recovery, because real stigma does exist. And so some folks might feel comfortable with that among others. And that's why it's so important to have diverse options. Okay. Oh my God, there's so many. Depending on where you live, we got that one. Okay. Out of the options that may exist and may be accessible locally, it may be hard to find places that are truly inclusive. Yes, Rebecca, thank you for noting that, right? So even within a certain recovery pathway, some meetings might be more inclusive or more judgmental than others. So that's why it's so important. If you find a recovery pathway that really works for you, but the meeting doesn't, and you have the privilege of checking out multiple meetings in your area, do that. Maybe the 6 a.m. meeting, you do not like it. You don't like the concepts that they're promoting or whatever, but the 6 p.m. meeting, I'm here to tell you, for many young folks, there's in Tempe, Arizona, there's at the Pigeon Coop, there's like an 11 p.m. meeting. A lot of people in the ASU community really like that meeting. So anyways, change up what you're trying. We share from our healed places. Ooh, I love that. Okay. Where I stay, most people don't have a ride to get to a meeting. That is so true, Ruben. To speak about our social determinants of health, it is a privilege to have access to transportation and the resources that will get us to our meetings. It is harder than it seems to go to your first meeting. Yes. We need allies to help build a bridge to support people seeking recovery, discovery pathways. Cal, so true, right? To tell someone, hey, you would benefit from recovery. Why don't you go check out options? Folks are not, especially when something that is often bred during active addiction is this feeling of isolation. It is, I would say, too much to ask someone to go seek these resources on their own, to be a bridge, to be a helping hand, to say, hey, friend, if you're okay with it, let's find an open meeting. Would you be okay with me going with you? That means a lot to many folks in our lives. Along with major transportation challenges and insurance coverage limitations. Thank you, Rana. That's such an important point. The insurance company determines the length and type of treatment you can have. That is so true. Your insurance decides for you, not yourself, not your doctor, how long you need in order to recover. We're illustrating here a lot of challenges that are even more pervasive than just the type of recovery pathway that exists. Admission wait times for both public and private programs is crucial when immediate needs. Thank you, Kelly. That is so true. Audrey's talking about language. Yes. Continue to reduce stigma. Okay. The framework that we use to define recovery, treatment, abstinence meetings can limit creativity in helping folks find holistic options. Love that. In my 20, okay, friends. Oh, we're at the end. In my 23 years of recovery after COVID, I notice meetings nowadays are online. And I think people are missing the human contact meetings. Stephen, so true. That is something that we often hear, right? Many of us shift to an online option. And many folks want to be in the room. There is something so different about being online versus being in person. I think many of us feel that same way. Okay. Friends, we are going to shift into our last question here, which I just want to ask, what is the role of harm reduction in all of this? So when we're talking about recovery, is harm reduction different than that? What is the role of harm reduction in our conversation today? I also want to acknowledge that this is a personal question, right? Because as with many things in recovery, how we choose to think of it is up to us. Ooh, Jennifer, I love it. We meet people where they're at. Yes. So harm reduction can be thought of as a partner to recovery, a promise for centering dignity. Yes, absolutely. A promise for centering autonomy, I always think of. Harm reduction can be whatever you want it to be. So true. It can be integrated into a person's recovery. Yes, look at all of us go. Okay, yes. So there are so many options. Recovery, or I'm sorry, harm reduction may be recovery for some people, full stop. Harm reduction may be harm reduction for some people. They do not think of it as recovery. They are choosing to reduce their risk of harm, and that is a beautiful thing, full stop. Reduce use can be recovery. Abstinence can be recovery. Recovery does look different for each of us, and that is why we should celebrate the fact that recovery does look different for everyone. Okay, harm reduction is a big factor in recovery, and that's why I like MAP programs. Woo, Ruben, I love that. Thank you for saying that. Yes, there is no shame in how folks choose to recover. We embrace and celebrate every way of how people choose to recover because all of us have different needs. Okay, friends, I want to acknowledge my last question, which no need to put in the chat, just walk away with this. So how has your view or your approach to recovery changed over time? If you are a person in recovery, and I heard a friend that said, I've been in recovery for 23 years. Congratulations, that is huge. I'm curious, friends, if it's been 23 years or it's been 6 months, how has your idea of recovery changed over time? How is your approach? How do you walk the walk of recovery? How does it look different now than it ever did before? All right, friends, we've got 4 minutes left, so I'm going to pause here. Thank you so much for being with me here today. If you have questions, I am here to stick around and answer them. You are also free if you want to learn more about this. I believe we're at safeproject.us. That's not our email, though. That is my email, but safeproject.us is our website, and you can learn more about everything that SAFE offers there. I'm going to pause and pass it back to Leslie. Leslie, do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions that have been submitted in the chat. So if there's anything that you all have, thank you all so much for your lively participation. We love that. And again, I want to echo what Sydney said, congratulations to everyone who has talked about their own recovery journeys. I mean, whether you have 6 days or 60 years, like we are so glad you're here. I love it. Just keeping an eye on it. It looks like we don't have any questions coming through. Giving y'all one last chance. One last chance. Not really. You guys can email Sydney or come or ask us any questions. Okay, as I mentioned before, you will receive an email with a link to the recording. And Sydney, are you open to sharing your slide deck as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
Okay,
friends.
perfect. You'll get that. And then also a reminder that within the next 2 weeks, you will receive an attendance certificate. I'm just verifying your attendance to the live webinar. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.